Hey everybody, Aaron here, and welcome to a movie review. Well, don't hit that unsubscribe button. Don't worry, folks. There's not going to be a change of formatting. I'm not going to go switch from anime to movies, obviously. But I did want to do a movie review today, obviously, of The Dark Tower, because The Dark Tower is pretty close to my heart. And here's the funny thing, is that as many of you might know about me on Twitter, or maybe you might have seen some of the Q&A videos or whatever, I watch a lot of movies. I've seen probably double, maybe even triple the amount of movies I've seen in comparison to my anime. So if I've seen like 800 something anime, easily probably like 2,400 movies. And I know that's hard to believe, but think about it in this sense. I've seen silent films, I've seen stuff from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I used to be part of a club in junior high, which we used to just watch old movies, and I've seen like a dozen from that. I used to see movies in a college class that I took that we saw several older movies, classics. I've watched a lot of movies. It's crazy. But, you know, I've always had a very particular taste for a lot of Stephen King books and movies. Stephen King movies are what I consider either really good or really horrible. There's no in-between with them. There's never like, oh, it was okay. No, it's always just either amazing, like, oh my god, it's up here, it's amazing, or, oh my god, this is terrible, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. It's just that low level. But what I decided to do was obviously I saw The Dark Tower because, like I said in the beginning of this, I am a huge fan of The Dark Tower. At the same time, I also hate The Dark Tower. Now, you might be like, well, what does that mean? I was like, go. Let me explain this first before I start talking about the movie in general. Hopefully, bear with me. So, The Dark Tower, I remember my dad had the first 3 books in his collection. That was in like this dusty cabinet that we had in my old house. And you know, I asked my dad, what is this? And he goes, oh, it's a Stephen King book. I only like read the first 2 and that was it. And I was like, oh, I mean, you know, I used to love reading, obviously. I still do love reading, but, you know, I saw this and I picked up the first one, which is called The Gunslinger. It's The Dark Tower, the first book, The Gunslinger. And I was blown away. This was probably one of the best books I've ever read in my life. It was, or at least one of the best Stephen King books, I'll put it that way. I loved it. I really did. And it was something that I saw the imagery in it and I just was blown away by it. You know, then I read the second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one. I believe that the 6th one I skipped. I'll explain that in a second. And I read the last book. Now, the reason I skipped the 6th one was because, honestly, I was getting really tired of The Dark Tower, and we'll get into that also in a few moments. But, you know, the end of the series was very good. I think that it was something that you could see coming to a certain degree, but at the same token, it was one of those Stephen King endings that only he knows how to do so well. Now, as many of you may or may not know, the Stephen King, you know, when he wrote this series, right? More so when he started it in perfect health. He was perfectly fine. However, during, I think it was the 2nd or 3rd book, it was one of those 2, excuse me. He was in a car accident, which is, you know, the notorious car accident. He was hit by a car, and, you know, from then on, he was on a lot of painkillers, and I think that regardless if he wants to believe it or not, or regardless if fans want to believe it or not, I feel like that really influenced a lot of the Dark Tower series that Stephen King had crafted from then on. I feel that he started going into this almost like super whimsical story with it, and maybe he had an idea to do that originally. I just feel like that was a little bit beyond maybe what even his idea was for it originally. And, you know, I think of the Dark Tower series as a close friend that you have a big argument with at one point in your life and you don't talk for years, and then you go back to him and, you know, you're like, oh, hey, you know, how you been, and all, etc. I think of it that way, where, you know, I read there was a graphic novel series that came out from Marvel, and the Marvel series focused more on the events of, like, prior to the actual Dark Tower series. It focused more on Roland and his Quartet, which is the name of his party, essentially. It focused more on that near the, like, beginning. So it was a prequel of sorts to the actual Dark Tower series. Now, you know, I really loved that. I thought that was so great, and I thought that was so well executed that it got me back into the series, and I continued with the books at that point because I actually stopped for a little while. I continued reading the books, and I skipped one of them because, honestly, it was getting to a point that I was just tired of the series. And it wasn't like, you know, oh, that's kind of messed up that you skip a book. You know, I really rarely do that. I typically always read a full series. It was one of the few, if probably only book series I've ever done that with, to be honest with you. I'm being legit honest with you guys. I don't really know of any other series I ever skipped a book with. Like, I've always usually plowed through a book series and be like, oh, I'll keep bearing with it and then finish it. It might take me a little longer, but, you know, Dark Tower series was one I skipped, and I do know what happened in it, obviously, but I skipped it to go to the end of the story. Now, when the movie was announced, this is announced probably in like 2012, 2013, I was happy. I was like, oh shit, the Dark Tower is coming out as a movie. That sounds really cool. Obviously, it's 2017, so what happened? Well, a lot of production issues happened, and they had issues with getting a screenwriter. They had issues with who was going to do the actual directing of it. They had one time Ron Howard was going to do it, then he quit. Then they had someone else come on do it, and then they quit. It went through several directors. It went through several writers. It had a lot of production delays, and it went essentially into production hell. Now, the thing was that finally they had settled on the guy who directed it, which the name escapes me unfortunately, but he finally directed it. And you know, one of the first things that we saw from Idris Elba when he was talking about it in an interview, he said that don't expect the Dark Tower books. This is only going off of a general idea of the Dark Tower. The best way I can describe it to you guys and girls, and this way without spoiling, because obviously this movie is not gonna this movie review won't have any spoilers. I will probably put that in the beginning or the title to make sure you understand that. But think of it this way: if this was out of 100% of what was adapted from the book, essentially only 5% was adapted from the book. I'm not even kidding you. Only 5%. Names were adapted, ideas were adapted. That was it. And it's really maybe we'll push it maybe to 7%, but 93% or at least around 90% was all completely different, and it hurts the movie and also helps in certain directions. So let's talk about the whole story. Maybe you're new to the Dark Tower series, obviously, and you're like, wait, what the hell are you talking about in general? So the Dark Tower, at least the movie, we're focusing on the movie now. We're past the books right at this point. The movie focuses on a young boy named Jake Chambers who, for the most part, has been having horrible nightmares, or what he at least thinks are something that it's like visions of sorts. But everyone else thinks it's like, oh, it's just bad nightmares because his father died, and for the most part, he's trying to, cope with that. But he keeps dreaming about this giant tower, this black tower, and even worse, he's dreaming about someone attacking it, and this man in black. And meanwhile, there's a gunslinger he dreams of also that's fighting back and trying to stop the destruction of the tower. Now, as he learns, though, that his dreams are not incorrect, there actually are visions. These are things that are happening in another world currently. And using various powers and various things that happen in the story, he ends up in the other world that this is taking place in, which is affecting his world, which is actually New York City. But it's also affecting places like Tokyo and Europe and stuff like that. But he ends up in this other world, and he meets Roland, the gunslinger, the last gunslinger, mind you. Now, Roland is of the gunslinger race, which is more so a group that has been tasked with defending the whole entire Midland. It's meant to be where they're the protectors. And obviously now that the man in black, who has basically decimated their forces, has come around, he's kind of given up because the man in black can't attack or hurt Roland directly for some reason, but he can still attack the other people, so he's killed all the people that around him closely to him to piss him off and to anger him, hoping that eventually he would just give up completely, which at that point we've seen Roland at this point kind of give up. Now, it essentially becomes like an adventure story from here on out, where Jake teams up with Roland and they figure out a way of stopping the destruction of the Dark Tower, because if it does destroy, it'll destroy all these other worlds in the process by having the barrier that protects all the other worlds open up and kind of release these creatures and dark beings and allow the man in black to essentially cause chaos all over the place within like one fell swoop. Now, this is not a bad idea for the Dark Tower. It's very different than what the Dark Tower books make the Dark Tower as a whole. Like, the tower itself is completely different. And I'm not going to go into it in case you want to read the book series, but note that it's 100% different. And the thing is that I understand why they went with this in this movie. I think that in some ways it was a smarter idea because it makes it more, I want to say, not kid-friendly per se, but more in the sense that you can have a different audience watch it. Because the Dark Tower books, I'll be honest with you, like, probably the best way to describe it without spoiling it, think of it almost like a hellish landscape. It's obviously because it's Stephen King, it has horror elements to it, but at the same time fantasy elements to it. And that makes it where it's not going to be applicable to everyone. This movie is more just fantasy. It kind of removes a little bit of the horror aspects. There's still some creepy stuff. There's still that little Stephen King, twist and turn here, but it's mostly different. It's mostly geared toward a different audience than the book series. And I have to really kind of push that toward you guys and girls. Do not go into this thinking, if you're a fan of the book series, do not go into this thinking this is the book series. It's nothing like the book series. Yes, the Man in Black, Roland, Jake, these are all characters you see in the Dark Tower series, but that's about it. That's really about it. The gunslinger stuff, some of the basic concepts, even like how his guns are made, they're made from Excalibur. It's not a spoiler, that's just what they explained really early in the movie. These are all elements you find in the books, but that's it. Now, the movie right now is sitting, I think, at Rotten Tomatoes at a very low score. I believe it's like 18% last time I checked. It might have dropped even more because it has been dropping quite frequently. And I'll say this right now, guys and girls, it's not that bad. It really is not that bad. The biggest issue with, the Dark Tower probably is that it rushes around way too much. It goes from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing, and it doesn't stop to ever explain a lot of detail. So, fans of the book series will understand some kind of key points. Like, they'll understand what the gunslingers are. They understand what their point is. They'll understand some of the concepts of why Jake is so special and why he's able to do certain things. But at the same token, though, there are a lot of new caveats that they threw into the story to make it so it's a different story completely from the books. And those aren't explained very well. They're not explained to the point of, like, where's this technology come from that the Man in Black's using? Why is he like this? Why are they considered this way? It never really goes into a lot of details about this. It doesn't even go into details about the enemies and stuff like that. And that is one of the biggest issues with the Dark Tower. It's going to be all over the place. And you need to understand that going into it. Do not expect a coherent story from this because it does not have a coherent story. It jumps around way too much to make it that way. However, at the same time, you can kind of understand what's going on enough that you can pay attention to the movie and not be completely like, what am I watching? You'll understand the key points, the points of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, where they need to go, and what they need to do. That's about it. And to be honest with you, folks, that is probably one of the best examples of how to do a movie semi-correctly, because you need to do that. You need to make sure everyone understands what you're doing in the movie, the plot line. And for the most part, that's understandable. In terms of the characters, the representations in comparison to the books, they're very different, but at the same time, they're also capture some of the elements that were from the books too. I really like Idris Elba as Roland, and I actually think that it was a good idea to have him there, and the Man in Black, being Matthew McConaughey. I've heard a lot of people say that they don't like him as the Man in Black. I think he did a phenomenal job. He was a little corny, but I think that was one of the issues with every actor in this movie. Besides Idris, I think was the only one that didn't have this problem, but every actor in this movie kind of hit some corny moments. Even when some scenes that are traumatic happen to, like, our main character Jake, for example, you can still see that he's still learning how to be an actor, and I'll tell you right now, he does a phenomenal job, but there's some times where he hams it up a little too much, and you're like, that's a little goofy than it should have came off as. But overall, I don't think the actors were portrayed very poorly. I think they were portrayed just right for the roles, and I think they did a phenomenal job. I know a lot of people wish that, the gunslinger was played by the first choice, the one that was actually based off of Clint Eastwood, but obviously Clint Eastwood is now, what, in his, like, 80s? To do Clint Eastwood now would essentially be weird. That wouldn't work. And a lot of the movements and the quick actions that the gunslinger needs to take, they're just beyond him now. Back in his heyday, he probably would have made the best. I mean, even Stephen King talked about how his inspiration for the gunslinger was based off of Clint Eastwood, but that's how it is, unfortunately. They had to kind of recast it. But, the action scenes are probably what are going to be the most enjoyable for anyone that watches The Dark Tower. The action scenes are freaking, I'm going to curse out, fucking fantastic. I'll just say it that way. I just stuttered because I wanted to think if I wanted to curse or not, but they're fucking fantastic, to be honest with you. I typically, I don't curse too often, but the fact that the way they did Roland, like how he reloads the gun, it captures what was amazing about the first book, but at the same time, it keeps going with it, because I hate to say it, the first book, as I said before, is probably the best Dark Tower book out of the whole series, so that it kind of dies down a little bit beyond that, and starts hitting these very weird points here and there. It goes up and down like a roller coaster ride. But when they explained him reloading in the first book, it was awesome. And they did such a great job of kind of capturing that on a film, which I thought was really cool. So the action scenes are really going to be what I think a lot of people will say and agree on. So far, I've seen all the reviews, too, that have agreed on it, are awesome. Overall, is The Dark Tower worth watching in the movie theater? No. No, it's really not. It's the thing is that I don't want to say it's bad. I'm not going to say it's bad by any means. That's not like, oh, so why are you saying not? Because obviously a movie theater is expensive. It's not the cheapest thing in the world. So if you're going by yourself, no. If you're going with friends, maybe, yeah, why not? Then, okay, go see the movie. You can see it with friends, obviously, because then it's not, it feels more like a adventure in its own right than a kind of single by yourself. I wouldn't recommend it. But I'll say this right now, it's really not a movie I would recommend seeing in the movie theater at all. I rather would just say buy it, or like try to rent it from various sites online. Obviously, when it comes out, like I think like I don't really know too many sites that actually do rentals anymore. I know that they still exist, obviously, but you can do it on various things. I would say probably that's the best way to go: buy it digitally or just rent it. But I will say, if I had to rate The Dark Tower A through F, I'll have to say it's a C minus. It's passable. I think this is. Remember, I said earlier that for the most part, Stephen King books and that are adapted into movies are either really good or really bad. This is the first time I'll say it's dead in the middle. It's like it could be really bad at times and it could be really good at times. It's enough that you'll still get some enjoyment out of it, but going to the movies and paying, an astronomical price for it, can't recommend that. But if you could find some other means of watching it via, rental, via buying it digitally, whatever, I would say try that. Anyways, guys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this movie review. If you guys did like this, please leave in the comments. I'll think about doing more of these before. As I said, I'm not really a movie reviewer, so I do apologize if I stuttered or said some stupid stuff. It's kind of just how it is. I just wanted to get this out because I do have a place in my heart for the Dark Tower. And I'll talk to you guys later. Have a great, blessed day, everyone. Have a blessed night at this point. God bless you all. Bye-bye.